Okay, so it's finally time. Time to talk about some Targon. For the past couple days, there have been a lot of new announcements for Legends of Runeterra. The next set is scheduled to release August 26th. It'll be named Call of the Mountain. And as some of you may have guessed, or more likely have been spoiled to, the new region is Targon. That's being added to the game. And today, the first Targon champion was revealed, and it's Taric. So we're going to be talking about all of it. Taric, all the new Targon cards revealed so far, the first new mechanic from the set, which is Spellshield, and more. And I'll be giving some additional thoughts on the cards revealed and what decks they could possibly fit in, and my thoughts on the release roadmap that the Runeterra team at Riot has set, and share one lingering concern I have with that. So we have a lot to cover. I do want to also mention that this time around, this is going to be a little bit more off the cuff than normal when it comes to me talking about some of these cards. So hopefully you guys still like that. In theory, that would mean that I would be able to get content like this out faster for you guys, instead of having something that's like 200% scripted, because a lot of my content has been that up until this point. But yeah, before we jump in, if you like content like this and you want to see more, be sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any future coverage from me. So let's start off by talking about Spellshield. I think that would make more sense before we jump into talking about Taric and the rest of the Targon cards revealed so far. So Spellshield reads, nullifies the next enemy spell or skill that would affect this unit. This is going to be a new mechanic for some people, and for others like me, it will be very, very familiar depending on what card games you came from. So basically, this blocks any effect from an enemy that would impact your unit in any way. This doesn't protect from the damage that another unit would deal to the unit that has Spellshield, unlike Barrier, which does do that. Also, you have to keep in mind, this does not say that the enemy has to target your unit. So that means that Spellshield will even protect the unit from something like the Ruination if the enemy plays it. The Ruination will still go off. It just won't kill any of your units that have Spellshield on them. Players are also going to have to keep in mind that Spellshield doesn't protect your units from your own effects. So that Ruination that you just played will still kill your own Spellshield units because it didn't come from the enemy. I have some big concerns about this mechanic, but they are specific to one card that was spoiled so far, so I'll be talking about that later. For now, I'm hoping that Spellshield doesn't show up on any units that are going to have a big impact in ranked, because this keyword has the potential to be extremely annoying in a game that already has very expensive removal when it comes to the removal cards that aren't damage based. So we're talking Vengeance, stuff like that. Spoiler alert though, so far Spellshield isn't on any of the units that have been spoiled yet. So now let's jump into talking about the man of the hour, which is Taric. And then we're going to talk about the other cards that got spoiled with Taric today, at least at the time of this recording, followed by the cards that were revealed before Taric. So Taric, level 1, 4 mana, 2 power, 4 health, has support. Give me and my supported ally tough this round. Copy the last spell you cast on only me this round onto that ally. And his level requirement is that he has to see you target or support allies 7 or more times. His level 2 naturally gets bumped up to a 3 power, 5 health unit. His support ability changes. So my supported ally and I can't take damage or die this round. Copy the last spell you cast on only me this round onto that ally. So I'll just go ahead and say here that the theme of almost all the cards spoiled so far, aside from the Spellshield mechanic, has been the support mechanic, and I'm pretty glad. I think support is probably one of the weakest mechanics in Runeterra so far, in terms of rank play. Maybe the weakest. There's very few support units that stand out, and the good ones are way ahead of the rest of the pack. So we're talking War Chefs, Shen, Kato the Arm, and I guess to a lesser extent Legion Drummer. We also have to keep in mind that both Shen and Kato had to get buffed first before they saw any real play, because they were really bad before they got buffed. But anyway, back to Taric. His level 1 is okay, but not amazing in my opinion. The stat line reminds me of Vi, although Taric costs 1 mana less, so that probably makes this combination of 2/4 stat line with tough a little better at 4 mana versus 5 mana. But the big reason to play this card is for his level 2, since he gives himself and the unit to the right of him a temporary unyielding spirit, basically. And his level requirement to get to 2, it seems like a lot, but I don't think it's going to be as bad as people think. There's 2 things you have to keep in mind. It counts both when you target or support allies, and it's not just him. It can be from other support allies too. Those count towards Taric's level up. And I'm not 100% positive on this, but I'm almost positive his copy ability is also going to count towards his level up. So he's comparable to Shen, even though he has the Vi stat line. I'm pretty sure a lot of people are going to try and run the 2 of them together, but my big concern is that they're actually going to compete with each other, since both of them cost 4 mana, and it seems like Taric, you want to run him in a mid-range deck, and mid-range decks in this game ideally would like to curve out. So if you're running Taric and Shen, that means one of them isn't going to get played until round 6, and hopefully I'll remember to explain that when we talk about another card later on that you have to run with Taric. It's not on this spoiler sheet here, but we'll talk about it later. Anyway, I do think Taric will be fine. There's a lot of ways you can build this support archetype. Demacia is one. Ionia for me is probably the number one mechanic. The number one region to build a support deck with. But yeah, Demacia, Ionia. Some people are even talking about Ezreal, given the other cards that were spoiled that's on this sheet here. But I don't think any of those ideas will be meta breaking, but we'll see. Okay, so before we talk about the rest of the cards here, we have to talk about Gem first, because it makes sense to talk about Gem first given some of the rest of the cards that were spoiled with Taric. So Gem, 1 mana burst spell, heal an ally 1 and grant it +1/+0. Can't be cast in combat or in response to a spell. So this card's pretty interesting. I doubt this is a card that's going to be good enough to actually run in your deck, but I'm saying that very cautiously because I said the same thing about Warning Shot, and Warning Shot definitely proved me wrong. People definitely run Warning Shot main deck. I initially thought stuff like Yordle Grifter would just get run, which makes Warning Shots, but not Warning Shot itself. So I could be wrong about Gem itself not seeing play in actual decks. This is the main card that people were mentioning they would try to run with Ezreal, because you get Ezreal to level 2 and then Gem effectively does 2 damage. It is kind of weird that you can't cast it in response to a spell. I think that's going to make the card really limiting. It does mean that I didn't mention this when I talked about Taric, but this card does make it to where if you're running cards that make gems anyway, this card makes it to where Taric isn't necessarily weak to Culling Strike. I can see situations where you're only going to have 1 shot to Culling Strike Taric, and if you don't take it, then your opponent just like jams a bunch of gems and buffs Taric a couple times, and then he's at a Culling Strike range. So you have to take your 1 action to kill Taric if your removal of choice is Culling Strike. So never mind the other spells that they could be running that could buff Taric, like if they're running Taric and Demacia, for example. But yeah, I think Gem will have some type of impact, And I want to say it won't actually be run in decks as a separate card. People just run cards that make gems in their deck instead. But we'll see. All right, Gift Giver. 1 mana, 1 power, 2 health. When I'm summoned, create a gem in hand. I think, honestly, this is one of, if not the best out of all these gem cards that are on this sheet here. I actually like it better than Mentor of the Stones, but we'll get to that in a minute. The summon effect I like because this means that you could potentially run this in Shadow Isles, although it might be hard to pair this type of style of deck with Shadow Isles. Shadow Isles barely has any type of support, barely any type of cards that support decks would want to run. There's not a lot of buff cards. There's 1 support card in Shadow Isles, and that makes your unit ephemeral, which isn't great. But yeah, Gift Giver, I like it. I think it's going to be a staple in this style of deck if you're running support with gems, or if you're just running gems by itself. I don't think you're going to be able to run the deck without Gift Giver. Mountain Goat, on the other hand, not a fan of this one. 2 mana, 3/1, has to strike to create a gem in hand. Dies to ping effects like Vile Feast, Nevermind, stuff like Mystic Shot. It's not quite as bad against 1 power units. Like, it still trades down, quote unquote, but at least you get a gem in hand for your troubles. I feel like Mountain Goat's the type of card where, like, if you need to get the additional strike value from Mountain Goat, it's going to be in your deck, it's going to be a bad card in your deck. If you don't really care, then you're probably fine running Mountain Goat, even if it ends up dying. But I don't know. I just have the feeling that people are going to try and run Mountain Goat in like a gem specific deck, and they'll need the Mountain Goat to hit something. And they're going to be real disappointed when their Mountain Goat gets killed off for 2 mana or less. Especially if your deck, if you need extra value out of the Mountain Goat, you need your deck to, that usually tells me your deck isn't good with trading, you're not okay with trading 1 for 1, card for card. Like, you want to get extra value out of your cards. And mid-range decks work that way, usually. Bannerman definitely does. All right, Mentor of the Stones, 3 mana, 1/1. Support, grant my supported ally +2/+2. Keep in mind that's a permanent buff. Also has Last Breath, where you create 3 gems in hand when this dies. This feels like a typical card that leans heavily on its abilities. And I feel like this is kind of a trap. Players tend to undervalue stats, and they tend to overvalue abilities when it comes to cards. This also dies to ping effects. Also, it's weird that this is an epic. I don't know what it is about this game where, like, if you look at a lot of the epics in this game, they're actually worse than a bunch of the rares in this game. There's very few epic cards that are actually, like, excellent that you just run all the time. I could see Mentor of the Stones curving into Taric. I could definitely see that if your Mentor of the Stones sticks. And you do get some value even if Mentor of the Stones dies. You get 3 gems in your hand, so it's not absolutely terrible, but I don't know. I feel like this card is probably going to get buffed to a 2/2 if it doesn't see play. So I'm not too high on it. I'll just leave it at that. All right, Shards of the Mountain. 4 mana, slow spell, fill your hand with gems. So some people were confused about this card. This says fill your hand with gems, which means your hand does not get replaced by gems. The card would specifically say replace your hand with gems if that was the case. But because it says fill your hand with gems, the only thing that means is that you will get gems in your hand until your hand reaches 10 cards, which is the maximum number of cards you can hold in hand. So if you have a 6-card hand and then you play this, you go down to 5 cards and then you get 5 gems for 4 mana. This is one of the cards I could see in like a gem specific deck. And that's pretty much it about this card. I think this card would get run before the actual gem card itself would. But again, I've been wrong about that. So gem is a burst spell. So I have to keep that in mind. Taric's Blessing of Targon. Or Blessing of Targon, actually. So this is Taric's champion spell. It's 5 mana, burst speed. Grant an ally +3/+3. In the case of the Taric champion spell, you would shuffle a Taric back into your deck. I think this card is quite good. It's basically Take Heart, but without the requirement that the unit has to be damaged. So yeah, I think this card is strong. I think it's actually slightly better than Fury of the North, which gives +4/+4, but it's temporary. Like, giving permanent stats in this game it's so much harder to deal with. Like, Fury of the North blows people out for sure, but it's just only for that. It's only a one-time effect. Like this, like, you blow somebody out and they still have to deal with the bigger unit. Brahm's pretty tough to deal with when you cast Take Heart on him, just as an example. You basically need hard removal to kill him. And if you don't have that, then he's just going to be on the board for the rest of the game, and you won't be able to deal with him because he has Regenerator. But, I mean, that's a specific case for a Regenerator unit. But yeah, I think Blessing of Targon's good. I think every Targon deck, every Targon mid-range deck that's pretty unit focused is going to be running Blessing of Targon. I think it's just wrong not to run it. Even if you're running Taric, you might run extra copies of this, like we saw with Fury of the North and Sejuani. All right, so those were all the cards that were spoiled today along with Taric. So let's backtrack a bit. We have a few more cards that I want to talk about. These were spoiled yesterday. Let's start off with Taric the Traveler. 2 mana, 2/2, has a support. Grant my supported ally +0/+2. When I first saw this, I was thinking that it wouldn't be that impactful, but I could be wrong. 2/2 is slightly below the normal stat line for a competitive 2-drop in this game. You usually want your 2-drops to be either a 2/3, like Warchef's is, or at least a 3/2. Although 2/3 has historically been the better stat line when it comes to rank play. So if it's not a 2/3 or 3/2, the ability has to be extremely powerful to make up for it. But the health buff is permanent on this, so that still makes Taric fairly compelling. Especially since most support units in the game so far, aside from the spoilers we've gotten, only give stat buffs or additional keywords that last until the end of the round. So I feel like this card, it gets close to seeing rank play, but I don't think it'll quite get there. I think there's going to be a lot of situations where this card will just be deal 2 damage to a random enemy unit and give a unit of your choice +2 health. Maybe that's good enough though, at 2 mana and a card slot in your deck. But we'll see. I kind of doubt it. Another card from this set could get this card over that hump, but we'll have to see. Something that we haven't seen in the past couple days anyway. All right, Mountain Sojourners. 5 mana, 2/5. Support, grant my supported ally +2/+2. If that ally has support, also grant its supported ally +2/+2. So we need to give some clarification on this card. This was what was initially revealed, but this card has actually been buffed per the dev team on the Runeterra subreddit. So it doesn't just buff one additional unit if there was a support unit to the right of it now. Instead, it will now buff every single unit in succession as long as each unit to the right of the previous unit is also a support unit. So if your entire board is support units, all of them get +2/+2 in succession. So this card has a lot of potential. The stat line is a bit underwhelming, but this card potentially granting you 8 or more additional stat points permanently. I think the stat line is going to matter a lot less. People are going to run this card regardless. Let's say this card works extremely well with Taric. In fact, I think if you're playing Taric, you have to play this card. There's no way around it. And it is actually a good epic card. I just noticed it's an epic. So an actual really good epic card. This is a staple of Taric. There's no way you can play this without Taric, in my opinion. But the first card that did come to mind when this first got revealed, since Taric hadn't been revealed yet when we first saw this, was actually Shen. I think barrier decks can also get use out of this card. You could play Shen on round 4, then follow up with this on the very next round. You put Shen to the right of this card when attacking, and then the unit to the right of Shen gets a barrier and a +2/+2 permanent stat buff. And then if that unit has a support ability, it just moves on to the next unit, and so on and so on. So Shen's a 5/7 in that scenario, and then he only gets bigger from there if you don't deal with this card. Again, it is weak to Culling Strike. That shouldn't stop anybody from playing this card in their Taric deck somewhere. But my one concern is that, again, people saying that if you run this with Taric and Shen together in the same deck, then Taric and Shen might compete with each other, since, again, they both cost 4 mana. But great card. All right, next is Arbiter of the Peak. 10 mana, 6/6 with Overwhelm. Reduce my cost by 1 for each time you targeted or supported allies this game. This card is interesting as well. I do get some Plaza, Guardian, and Scuttlegeist vibes from this one, but I'll say this is a power creep version of those. Because unlike those cards, there's actually 2 different ways you can reduce the mana cost on this one, which I'm super glad about, since one of the ways to do it is via support units. And there's not a lot of quality support units in this game, like we mentioned so far. Targeting allies with effects is much easier in this game, especially given the next card we're going to be talking about. I think this will find a place somewhere. If not in a Taric deck, then it'll find a place in Shen barrier decks. But it is definitely the strongest among that 10 mana cycle of cost reduction cards so far, in my opinion. And finally, Bastion. 3 mana burst spell. You give an ally spell shield this round. I am pretty terrified of this card. I think it has a lot of potential to be busted. We need to keep in mind that, again, hard removal compared to other card games isn't very mana efficient in this game, and that's intentional. By hard removal, we mean cards that can kill units regardless of how much health they have. So these are cards like Culling Strike and Vengeance. And again, this will even block the Ruination. So I'm pretty concerned because I think the meta that we're in now shows just how bad and inefficient removal spells like Vengeance are in this game, even with spell mana. So we're introducing not only a keyword that makes those cards even worse than they already are, but a card that grants that keyword at burst speed for only 3 mana. That scares me. This is probably going to be a staple in Targon decks regardless, and I don't know if that's healthy for the game. All right, let's finally talk about the Targon reveal itself. I know there have been several videos from your favorite content creators covering this already, but I wanted to give some additional thoughts on why the Legends of Runeterra team at Riot is switching to this new release structure of one set consisting of 3 separate expansions. So just like I mentioned in the beginning, the next set is called Call of the Mountain. It'll release on August 26th, which is 2 weeks from the time of this recording. With that, a new ranked season will start, which means this current ranked season will end probably around the 24th or 25th. And this seems par for the course so far because that's exactly what happened when Rising Tides came out and the game left open beta. So in their latest blog, the team defines a set of cards as a cohesive group of cards that are released over 1 or more expansions. Every 2 months, we'll be getting new cards in the form of an expansion, just like the team has mentioned before. But the expansions will all be part of the same set of cards. This last part of this piece of information is what's really exciting to me though. And this will matter down the line when it comes to deck building rules for different formats and modes. So this tells me that the dev team is already thinking about the future, not only when it comes to new modes, which will probably get introduced through the Gauntlet and lab modes we have now, but new formats as well. So this is something I briefly talked about in a video I did way back before the game went into open beta, where I shared my wish list for Legends of Runeterra. I do want to be clear that even though we're going into our 3rd set, I think we're still pretty far away from any type of format split. I know not everyone is a fan of card games being split into multiple formats, and the argument always seems to be that they want to be able to use all of their cards. I think the hidden issue under that is that the old format, where you're still able to use all the cards you have, doesn't get supported by the devs, and it ends up being treated like a giant ban list in favor of the new and fresh format that gets introduced that only allows you to use a certain group of cards. So examples of this are Standard and Magic the Gathering. Although the older formats in that game do get supported, it's not the same level of support as Standard and Hearthstone, where that actually happens, pretty much. So I'm in favor of format splits, honestly. I don't think you can continue to balance a card game around every single card you already have. Eventually, it becomes impossible, and the only alternative is to go the Yu-Gi-Oh route and just ban cards. Something I don't necessarily hate, but I'm definitely less in favor of that than just doing a format split. People eventually get tired of seeing the same cards over and over when you're playing competitively. At least I know I do. Anyway, it's not surprising that they're thinking about this down the line, because you should be as a card game developer, but it's still really nice to see here. Really quick before moving on, I did want to mention a little blurb here where Riot was explaining the release schedule and how the 3 expansion set would work. They mentioned that there may be a few surprises here and there, possibly in between expansions. Maybe we get promo cards in between expansions. I think that could be very cool. It might just be new modes though. Who knows? Anyway, just like with Rising Tides, Call Them Out in every set afterwards is going to add 1 new champion to each existing region, but the new region will get the bulk of the champions in order to catch up with the existing regions. So this will be the same for the other cards in the set as well. Every region will get some new cards. The new region will get the most though. By the final expansion, every region will have the exact number of champions and roughly the same amount of cards in total. Now this does mean that for the first 2 expansions, some regions are going to have more cards and even more champions than others. One noticeable difference is that this set, when completed, will be 169 cards, which is larger than Rising Tides, which was about 120 cards. So we are getting bigger sets. They're just getting split up into 3 parts. Let's finally talk about why Riot is switching to the schedule, and I'll give some additional thoughts into their reasoning and share one thing that I'm a little worried about. So the team stated the reason for this new release schedule and splitting a setup into 3 expansions is to try and hit the sweet spot of the metagame staying fresh. They want the game to always be in a situation where there's a lot of decks seeing a good amount of play and that no meta is ever truly solved. They also want the game to be in a spot where we just get more cards released more frequently. I was actually pretty skeptical initially when they first announced they would be switching to this schedule a few months back. I've always been the type of person that was against having new cards released too frequently, because I like working with the cards we have to solve any problem in the meta. So I was afraid that cards being released every 2 months meant that we'd never have enough time to find new strategies with the current cards, and that players would just be lazy and not even bother trying to find those strategies, instead choosing to just wait until next release. But after going through 2 sets with monthly balance patches in between, I feel like the community is kind of just doing that anyway. Very, very few players actually try to solve the meta, and most just choose to wait for the next balance patch from Riot. I don't really like it. Maybe I'm just too much of an old school card gamer, but that's the way it is. And honestly, it's been that way for years. So the more I think about this change now, the more I'm actually a fan of it, especially now that we have more information on how things will work. We've had to wait 4 months for a new set up until this point, and I've got to say, even with monthly balance patches, there have been times where the meta did feel pretty stale, and there seemingly wasn't too much else to find. And I think that's been especially true with Rising Tides, in my opinion anyway. Of course, there's always going to be strategies and decks that the community will just miss entirely. Even now, I'm pretty sure there's at least 1 deck out there that's good that no one has taken the time to optimize or has even discovered yet. But yeah, I'm a fan of cutting down the wait time in half. The one thing I'm curious about though is the schedule for balance patches. So currently we get a balance patch every month between sets. But now we're getting new cards every 2 months, which means that we get a balance patch around the same time that we get a new expansion released. Now, for those saying, well, what's the big deal? They'll just keep doing monthly balance changes. It usually doesn't make sense to balance cards when new cards are getting ready to be added to the game at the same time. This was the case with Rising Tides. We had a balance patch on April 15th, 2 weeks before Rising Tides released on the 28th. So I and a few others in the community were expecting to have a normal scheduled balance patch 2 weeks after the set release, which would be 4 weeks or a month's time frame. But we didn't get one because we just had new cards get released 2 weeks prior, and there needed to be time for the metagame to settle. So by the time we got the next balance patch, Rising Tides was out for about a month. So almost 6 weeks since between patches, between those two balance patches. Now, technically, the patch was within the same month. So you could argue that it was still a monthly patch. So I'm guessing if we keep that same patch schedule, then Riot will probably have the mentality of patch every month, but not necessarily every 4 weeks in order to stay flexible. I could see that. If not, then we might see a change in the balance patch schedule for every 2 months as well. But that's everything I got for you today. With this new card release schedule, I can't help but feel a little bit of nostalgia from my Magic the Gathering days where we'd have what we called blocks made up of 3 full card sets. But the blocks were more due to having multiple formats in the game at the time. And it was a way to keep things not only organized, but balanced as well. So you clearly knew which card sets were legal for which format. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, again, feel free to leave a like as it really helps me out and gets this video out there to others in the community, especially with me coming back from a break. YouTube has not been kind to me lately because of that. Basically, even YouTube is mad at me that I haven't been uploading. So that's the best way I can put it. But yeah, if you don't want to miss future coverage of the new set from me, subscribe to the channel and don't forget to hit the notification bell below to make sure you know when the next video goes live. Feel free to check out the other places you can find me on the internet in the video description below. You'll find my Twitter, Twitch channel, and we have a community Discord as well that you can join. Thanks for taking time out of your day to watch this, and I'll see you next time. Take care.